Paul Dyer, and welcome to another show of Bridges Live. And I would like to welcome Mr. William to Bridges Live. We're going to be talking about social justice, and I just want to talk about and get people aware, because most of the things I do on Bridges Live is always to give information, understanding, and help people go into an action. I think there's a lot of things that goes on around this globe, our universe, our neighborhoods that we just turn a blind eye to. I just recently got off another show about human trafficking, and that's something so dear to my heart that it saddens me that people still don't understand that it goes on in our civilization. So, William, welcome to the show. Welcome to Bridges Live.
Thanks, glad to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself first, and let's just go right into what you're doing and how you're doing it, and what's making the change for it.
So, my name's Will Armaline. I go by Will or Bill, either one. My day job is I'm a sociology professor at San Jose State University, and then I'm also the director of the San Jose State University Human Rights Institute. And as an institute, we think of our work in three arenas. So we work in education. So we have a human rights minor program at the university, but we also, we believe very much in public intellectualism, like the good kind, not the crappy kind. And so we really think
you're definitely going to have to unpack that, because people who are not intellectuals, they are not going to get it. It's going to go right over their heads. And
all that means for us, I mean, other people, I think, depending on whose mouth it's coming out of, it can mean different things. But for us, what that means is that we don't think of ourselves as, so San Jose State is one of the universities in the CSU, in the California State University system. And we're really the workhorse in the state of California. I mean, it's really us who teach the vast majority of the working class and middle class in the state of California. It's actually not the UCs, it's us. And so we in my institute, we take that job very seriously. And we think that our job as an institute is not just to serve those students that come in and out of our classrooms every day, but to serve the broader communities that our university is set to serve the public of, right? So in other words, when we think of education, we're not just thinking about the human rights minor program for our students, but what kind of educational opportunities are we putting out there for the broader general public for free, that they have some reason to be invested in what we're doing and see us as a resource for them as well. So in other words, our intellectualism is not supposed to be just be penned up in some office somewhere and talking to each other and navel gazing and teaching our classes. We're supposed to be actually engaging with community members that we live with and work with and are supposed to serve, not just their kids or nephews and nieces or whatever when they're coming to our classrooms. So
it's funny because we talk about I say this a lot with a lot of organizations, and I'm calling them out. If you're in a fraternity, you're in a sorority, you're in all these organizations, these civic organizations, and you're just sitting around pontificating about what you could do, would like to do, and doing nothing, you're not helping, you're hurting.
So we just think, we take that label as a public worker, public servant as a compliment. We think that's something people should have pride in. And we want to show people that we're proud to do that work and we're proud to serve the entire public however we can. And so that's what we mean when we use that phrase, public intellectualism, is that we just want that our work not to be penned up somewhere where the people, frankly, that we're supposed to serve and whose taxes are paying my salary every day have no access to that and have no use for it. So again, we think about our work along the lines of education. Programming is another. So like you just saw, we had our huge human rights lecture series this past 2 weeks that happened to focus on the life and work of Dr. Angela Davis, who, for those of you who don't know, her famous trial in the early 1970s was actually held in San Jose. So there's a very sort of close regional connection to that history that I think, frankly, everyone who claims to be sort of progressive and on the left or in the realm of like anti-racism, these sorts of things should know that history, right, of Dr. Davis and the resistance of her and others in her trial. And so that's a good example of how we think about programming with this public face as well. Like that wasn't something we just did for the university, right? That was broadcast for free to anyone, with internet access, basically, that wanted to join. And that's the way we think of all of our work, is How can we make all of this stuff? How can we as an institute, how can we as a university be that conduit to help people get access to these kinds of people, this kind of content for free, again, open to the public. And then lastly, our just to finish out, so you know what we're doing. Lastly, we call praxis, which just is a fancy way of talking about our applied work, right? The way that we work with community members to solve social problems that confront their lives every day. So that's when we get into our policy work, because we're a research and policy institute. So one of our jobs, as we see it, is to help inform policy according to human rights standards and according to the best practices in the world. And so what happens is community members, community organizations come to us and say, hey, we really would like to work on housing. We'd really like to work on policing or criminal justice reform, whatever it happens to be. Or a legislator, a policymaker might come to us and say, look, Will, we know you have expertise in this area. We really want to make sure that we create a bill that's effective when it comes to policing or whatever it happens to be. And then we'll apply our skills, again, in a very public way so that everyone gets the benefit of what we're paid to do. And we try our hardest to inform that stuff and get it as good as we can help make it. And between those three things, we stay pretty busy.
I hope so.
You know, we're just trying to do our job, you know?
I hope we actually get put out of work is what our goal is.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah,
less to do would be cool.
Yep. Couple things. As a teacher, as you're doing this on a constant daily basis, I want to talk to it's like I always say, it's easy to talk to the choir and the people who come in, but we have to actually have to reach the people who are just not getting it. Yeah. And that it's like it's on my big whiteboard here. It's like, how do we reach that? I put, how do you reach that with a question mark? Because like I said, I just came off this human trafficking thing, and people who know it, people who don't. So what are some of those things you can suggest how to reach that question mark of people just like, they're just not getting it?
Well, it's a tough question, as you know.
It is.
Right?
I mean,
there's no. I'm not gonna gas myself up and pretend like I have the universal answer to it, you know. But we have some ways that we, as a team, try and work with that. So I have a great example. It's an actual example from our event. So we had, you know, it was very positive. Lots of people are participating, but then you have folks either in the chat or in discussion who are either resisting, pushing back on certain things politically, certain things theoretically, and this kind of a thing we welcome, right? So we are, in that sense, we are civil libertarians, right? We do believe in open, honest discourse and intellectual debate, and even not so intellectual debate, right? I mean, that's
just gets like rah rah rah.
I mean, like within certain bounds, like sometimes that's what needs to happen. Now that said, we do really think that there are some limits to that, right? So we are not folks that confuse, for example, free speech arguments with fascism. We don't welcome fascism in our debates and under any circumstance.
So, I sometimes I think breaking it down to the third grade level, because I see people when they use the different words of fascism, communism, and all these other isms, and I don't think they've really looked at the word or understood the word. Do you find that to be true also?
Yeah, and I think it's only very rare cases, by the way, where we would have to make those kinds of judgments. So someone disagreeing with you, yeah, that's not what we're talking about. Someone even expressing hateful views toward folks, also not necessarily what we're talking about. I mean, people, I think we have to be have a certain level of flexibility and understanding for people to meet them where they are to some extent.
So explain fascism.
Okay.
Simply, and this is for people who disagree, please inbox or share whatever you want to do, but this is just a simple format, please. So explain fascism.
So when we're talking about, I mean, there's lots of ways to define fascism, right? I'll stick to sort of basics. When we're talking about fascism, there's a number of ways that it can sort of manifest itself, right? But the central thing to understand is that fascism has a history of getting its normalcy in achieving its normalcy through parading as free speech, through parading as, well, we're actually just here to debate you on a particular issue or question. And the problem is that some of the fundamental tenets of fascism are to remove, in fact, all of the rights to speech and debate, completely, and for some of us in our families, our literal biological existence. And so what many people think, so I'm going to push back on a lot of definitions of fascism here, just so people understand it from a social scientific perspective. Okay. Fascism isn't always necessarily with the trappings of white supremacy, American style.
Correct.
Right. So certainly there are forms of fascism that have sort of matched that paradigm. Right. We can see that coming out of, certain organizations in the United States that are deeply white supremacist. Going all the way back to the Confederate South and other sorts of political entities that have been with us for some time. We also have the obvious examples of the Nazi regime and the Italian fascists, and these who had a very similar sort of notion of a master race and this sort of racial ethno-nationalism, right? But the thing is fascism can come a lot of other forms. So let's recall we have Latin American flavors of fascism, right? I.e. Pinochet, i.e.
Right.
folks. And they had a flavor of this in their deep sort of oppression of indigenous populations and formerly enslaved populations in Latin America, but it would be a slightly different kind of discourse than the white supremacy of the United States. Similarly, you can look at folks like India's Modi, right, who is
still
very clearly a fascist, right? I mean, like they actually are in partnership with one of the oldest, like, open fascist parties on earth, right? India has one of these. So, but as you know, that's not a white supremacist regime. No. Obviously, it's an ethno-nationalism, right? So, I just want to say that because I think people misunderstand fascism as the single milieu.
But the pushback I have is I don't think they misunderstand. I think they're just misread.
Perhaps.
And what I mean by misread, I think they miss reading. Because once you read it, it's pretty much right there in print, exactly what it means. So a misread, I don't think people are reading. So I think they use it from these sound bites that people are trying to get them to curve towards an idea.
Yeah. And I think Paul, the best way to understand, and I'm speaking for myself here.
Sure, please.
Because I want the audience to understand is my general stance, certainly our stance as an institute, is we are absolutely civil libertarians. There are very, 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 very few instances where we are going to argue for any kind of censorship or any kind of curbing of that. We do not fear engagement. We don't fear debate. We don't fear genuine intellectual debate of ideas and perspectives, and it can be heated and it can be heartfelt and it can be all those things. But I don't like to do this too much because I don't want to sort of murder the quote, right? But of course, I'm having a brain hemorrhage right now, I'm sure, of some sort. At any rate, his name's going to come to me in a second. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name right now. It's been a long day. But the quote is right. It's like, if the debate begins with, if we're to engage in a debate and the terms of the debate that you're initiating is, I don't have any right to exist.
Correct.
Then we're not in a debate. This is a threat and an attack.
Correct.
Like we're not, this is not an exchange of ideas because that requires some level of equal terms. But if the base position that you're beginning from, like the starting point is, I'm not even, me and my progeny and everyone like me are literally subspecies that don't deserve to exist on the planet.
Yeah, we're not even human to you.
We're not having then that's not, we can't engage in that together. That we have to call that what it is. Then I am inviting you into a democratic stage and platform to just openly attack me and everyone like me. Right? So, you're not interested in so it's a
do you think that's where the breakdown of social engagement happens? The not misinterpretation, but the lack of understanding where they're coming from and who they're delivering to. You think that's the disconnect? Because I think that's what's reprehensible about it, is that someone's talking and they're talking from a position that they haven't even taken an idea of who you are or even anything about you. So they negate the conversation.
Here's where it gets messed up. So you get the like hardcore civil libertarians that I love, by the way, folks like Glenn Greenwald, folks like all of these amazing journalists without whom our work as sociologists would be impossible.
Right.
I can't do my work without the Glenn Greenwalds out there and these kinds of stuff. However, in this whole platform conversation that got hot, in Berkeley and all that, and I'll note, by the way, they were wrong entirely about how all that turned out. The deep platform movement actually completely worked. Berkeley is still Berkeley. They still have free speech there. Apparently, they're not eating each other alive in the streets. Things are okay.
We hear crazy things. We hear crazy things.
Yeah. So there was all this fear mongering about, you can't deplatform people that are coming to. That's bullshit. That's utter bullshit. And I'll give you the sort of classroom version, and I'll get into it, and you'll see where I'm going. So people, first of all, don't understand how the First Amendment works. The First Amendment only protects you from state censorship.
That's it.
Of your speech.
That's it.
That's all.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that just because you think something, you can walk up to a major university or any major public platform and say, I demand you spend $500,000 on security and set me up with a speech and do X, Y. And of course not. We make those kind of decisions all the time. and I give this as an example to like, my students will talk about, every university has this sort of and I mean, I literally mean, I've never been to a university that does not have this, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, every university has that gentleman, woman, whoever, who's out screaming at everybody in the open lawn where the students are. They're usually a right-wing Christian of some sort with a horribly offensive sign about LGBTQ populations or women or whatever. And it's like really aggressive. Like they'll yell at people and like call them sluts and like do all kinds of really wild stuff.
Every campus.
I've literally never been to one where this doesn't happen. And we go through it and it's like, okay, does that person have the right to do what they're doing? Yes. Yes, they do. And that's why we find them on every camp. They know they can. And students debate them and all this kind of stuff. And everyone's fine with that. And that is the First Amendment. The police will not come and arrest them for that. But they shouldn't. However, if that gentleman walks 2 blocks up to the student union office and says, I demand you give me the ability to give a keynote in your series on my theory on homosexuals and female sexuality, they're going to be laughed at. And of course they will. And we should be, right? Because why should we be spending this resource? What's the public call for your talk? How does this serve the intellectual debate? These are decisions we make all the time. And of course we do. And of course we should. But people confuse First Amendment rights. And so the other thing is, First Amendment rights don't protect you from the consequences of your speech.
See, I'm a constitutionalist, and that's the other thing. You have to understand what those written words were saying. I understand how it gets interpreted. It's different. Yeah. And that to me seems where the argument is. The interpretation.
And so if you upset an entire university with your speech, and they find it repulsive to the point that like, we don't want you or your kind here for sake of safety. Let's recall the people who are being deplatformed in places like Berkeley were doing the following. In their speeches, they were literally showing pictures and personal identifying information for trans people on campus to invite attacks. And so like these were literal acts to protect like actual people.
Right.
And then you have all these dumbasses coming out the woodwork of, oh, woe is me, their First Amendment rights. Like, I mean, it was just, it gets to a kind of asinine level of conversation where we leave any kind of connection to reality to defend these like purely ideological lines. And I think for me, that gets into a realm of the ridiculous that we're just not willing to follow.
So, Will, do you know, sometimes we have to think that the people who are actually doing this is purposely doing this to cloud the environment of thought. And yet then there's this back door of slipping something through. Do you think that's what's really going on? I mean, I do. I don't think people are that bad. I think it's purposeful.
Yeah, I think so. There's great writing on this, by the way. So two of my favorite authors on the contemporary sort of fascist and anti-fascist, we'll say movements, are Shane Burley. He's a journalist and writer out of the Northwest, and then Mark Bray, who's written an excellent book on the history of Antifa and is a scholar on the East Coast. And both of them have done just excellent work on this. They were, Mark was debating folks on Meet the Press during this time and all this, a few years back. And, so if you want to read up on this, those are two of several folks I would really highly recommend, and sort of the history of these movements and these theories. And they agree with you, Paul. And so one thing that Mark talks about is, again, our first mistake is to accept on its face their claim that this is a genuine effort to engage in ideas, and this is a movement for free speech. That can be deconstructed fairly quickly with very little effort, right? But again, people become so terrified to cross that civil libertarian line that it's like, oh, what's the harm in just doing this?
Well, there is no harm.
I guess we should hear them out. What's the harm in having a debate? Well, the harm is that's all they wanted in the first place. You've already lost. The only thing they were trying to get, they know that they're not going to listen to a damn, they're not there to be convinced. They're not there to contribute to the body of ideas. Right. They're not there to listen. They're not there to educate your audience. And you know that because they're literally telling you that. They're literally saying that out loud, right? In their beliefs, in their actions, right? In the way that they are carrying these things out. Their goal is to be made legitimate by you.
By your denial.
Right. They don't give a shit about the actual conversation. They know that if Berkeley allows them to give a keynote, they now appear as legitimate and normal on some level to that entire community.
So as you're teaching your students, what are some of the things I want to get as people watching this and listening to this, I hope they play it, whatever the hell you do it. How can you help, say, to protect their minds from this? Like, you got to hear certain words that rings out. It's almost like an abusive relationship. It's almost like you got to recognize the flag. So like, you know what? Let's listen to this. And oh, nope, not me. It's time to go.
Well, I think I'm going to approach this as an educator, right? I don't want to be, I don't want this to be just my position or something like that. I don't want them to just come to this conclusion because it's something that I'm saying or whatever.
I do like that you're for me, I'm such a curious person, and I've been a practicing Buddhist for like 30 years, and we have a different position of how we intake things just because of the practice in itself. But people don't read enough, study enough, and feel enough. So that makes people just react a lot. They're just reacting. They're just bouncing off of walls like a physics experiment. Bing, bing,
bing. And I think you combat that with like I said, doing the reading and studying the history of these movements. So, and that's why I suggest the authors that I did, because they provide an actual historical context for coming to these kinds of conclusions and how we deal with these political forces in our society, right? And how that's worked out for various factions, right? So, and I don't claim, like I never would have like the answer on these really complicated kinds of questions, but I can tell you again, like how we're trying to deal with it. So I'm going to like instruct my students at all times, you need to always be open in a democratic society to debate, conflict, disagreement. And that all has to be done with a certain level of love and care. By the way, I shout out, I've been studying Buddhism for a long time as well. I'm really happy to hear that. I try and engage this in the same way. So in that sort of vein of Buddhism, the way that I teach my relationship with my students is I tell them part of my job is to love them unconditionally.
Yes.
Without judgment, without evaluation, without like literally part of my job is to be an adult in their life that without corruption or distraction or any ulterior motives, my only goal is for them to achieve what they want to achieve in their life and to be happy sort of, members of society, and right? That I'm an adult in their life they can count on for that kind of care without consequence, care without ask in return.
And before you move on, Will, I just want to put a disclaimer out there. Yes, it takes a lot of practice to have that unconditional, compassionate love without judgment. It just doesn't come overnight. There's a lot of work that goes through it. There's a lot of
it's a lifetime of work. It's a lifetime.
Yeah, but so people say, well, some people say it's impossible to have any judgment. No, it's possible. Trust me. It just takes a daily, constant training of practice throughout your day. But go ahead, finish.
And so I want to teach them to engage others in a similar vein, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're trying to, if we are in a democratic society, or at least if we're trying to create one out of what we've got, right? That's an actual literal skill that we have to develop and be able to use in the world. Is how do we work with those that we may not and likely will not agree on all things,
right,
but still be able to be a caring, loving community with one another, where we can count on each other, for example, when there's a pandemic, for example, or other kinds of crises, and we can have the kinds of society and communities and neighborhoods and schools and these kinds of things that we all want to live in, right? Where, everyone is relatively well supported, everyone's free to live their life, these sorts of things. And so I really want to teach them that. And in the way that you engage in those kinds of things are with respect, compassion, care. But it also means that you also need to be responsible intellectual. And then if you have a position, it needs to be grounded in mutually observable evidence. So that's a genuine debate and conversation where it's not personal attack. You can look together at what's in front of us to figure out.
And that's the
right?
key
And
word.
that is the basis of the debate.
And
now,
you said
once
it,
we get into that other stuff,
evidence. You said it, observable evidence. Yeah. That's like a big underline, like on your whiteboard.
Yeah. And that's not to be sort of like science fetish, right? It's just to say, like, you can't expect people to be able to work from your sort of like blind faith and beliefs that they don't have any access to. They may not share, they may not have any education of, right? So you have to, on some level, meet people where they are, just like you need them to do the same. And you can only do that with material or terrain that you can both engage with freely. And I think mutually observable evidence, doing things like, well, let's look at the history of these movements, for example. Let's look at that history together. Does it work to invite them into your platforms and give them that normalcy? Do you find that increases our freedom of speech in that society? Or did you find that may have had some unintended consequences for you? Right. So that is the way that I try very hard as a professor and a Buddhist to sort of conduct my life. But you engage with someone that I feel crosses that line to where that kind of engagement really isn't possible and also is not their intention.
Right.
I want my students to be able to recognize it for what it is, which is a threat. They're not there to talk to you. They're there as a threat to you. And, I'm a student of Malcolm too. right? I know, like, I believe in the word enemies.
Yeah. I can recognize,
and when they tell you they're one, that is going to change our that's going to change our interactions. Just because I come to you with love, right, doesn't mean that's the only language I'm going to speak.
I've been so privy to with my different Rinpoches, and the Dalai Lama says, so when I asked him about an enemy, and they said, so what do you think about enemy? He goes, I recognize enemies, I pray for enemies, I bless enemies, but I don't have to hang around them.
Yeah, right. And it's not that you're putting them in this sort of lifetime category or something like that, but it's just part of navigating the world, where you have, people that depend on you for protection, for learning, for all kinds of other things. You have to also demonstrate their ability to defend themselves and others, and sometimes that's necessary, even when done out of love. And it should be done out of love, right? You shouldn't want to hurt people or want to have to do that. It's just so. I think you can see what I'm saying. Again, I just I think it's unfortunate that we can't have more nuanced conversations about this, I guess.
But I'm glad I'm having this conversation with you. I feel blessed, and I'm glad people are going to listen to this. I feel blessed because one of the things you pointed out is that do some reading, do some self-educating for yourself. Allow yourself to come in with an open mind and an open heart to hear and receive, but also recognize the enemy for what they are. But you can only recognize that if your heart is open. You cannot recognize an enemy if you're closed off and you're only coming from one perceived thought. So those things, if people can take that away from them, we can move forward in a very civilized society and a very sociable, changing society, because I think we're always in this ebb and flow of times, right? And I think we're part of this flow right now. We're about ready to ebb, and so here we are.
Let's hope.
Thank you so much. Well, anything else you want to give for us? Anybody to help you out with the things you're doing? To give a shout out to organizations that you need help in around the world?
Yeah, definitely. So first thing is, you can definitely check us out, www.sjsu.edu/HRI. So it's just the normal SJSU website /HRI. You can check us out. You can check out all of our work, our projects. You can get at me as well. We're always open to working with folks and doing new things. We also, the organization that we plugged in our event that we work very closely with in the Bay Area, their name is Silicon Valley Debug. They're an amazing organization of folks that are all system impacted families. So it's an organization of families that have all had folks who have either been, killed or hurt by police officers, jailed here, and put in prison here. So these are all system impacted families and community members who organize this organization, and they do all kinds of incredible work here and trainings all over the country with video defense models for folks that are being kind of railroaded into prison, giving them other methods of defense in the courtroom. We've been working with them on what we're calling Care First, Jail Last in our county to move away from jail and toward rehabilitation alternatives. Similar to what's happened in LA. We're actually working with our partners in LA on that campaign. But it's just a wonderful organization that I always like to plug and get more attention to, and we're hoping that other organizations like this can continue to pop up throughout the country that are led by those who are most impacted by these institutions.
I know I do a show on every Wednesday called You Be the Judge, and my partner on that show is an attorney, and we just talk about legal issues and how to navigate through the legal court system, because Maryland is the highest rate of jailing Black boys in any place in the United States. What a proud thing for them to be, right? So it's a scary thought. and I also been trying to get Angela Davis on my show. I've been trying to get a hold of her for a long time. And so, but yeah, so thank you so much, and keep doing the work you're doing, keep putting it out there, and keep getting your hands dirty.
By the way, my quote from earlier is from James Baldwin. I feel terrible that
That's okay.
how could I forget Baldwin's name? It's like it's one of those things like, man, of course when I'm on a show, I'm gonna forget James Baldwin's name. But he was the one who very famously said what I said earlier about like, look, if the beginning of the debate is I'm not even allowed to exist, this is not a debate, it's a threat. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna treat it as one. Right. And I think and I think if we think about who he was,
yes,
right, and in the time he was having to say that,
yes,
that should penetrate pretty quickly.
Yes.
Right. And I just try and keep that in my heart when I'm dealing with those issues. I remember what Baldwin said, and that kind of gives me some guidance there.
Thank you, my brother from a different mother. Many blessings to you. I will contact you again. Thank you so much. You have a pleasant evening. Stay safe. Be careful out there.
You too. It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to Bridges Live. You can always contact me here, Bridges Live. Inbox me about anything you want to know or anything you want to have a conversation about, because this is about information, exercising your education, and making a change in this world. We can only do this if we do it together. Thank you so much.